You think you've arrived. The air feels thinner, clearer. Something inside you has shifted so sharply it's as if lightning tore through your chest and burned away the fog you've been living in your whole life. And for one breath, maybe two, it feels like freedom. A truth so stark, so undeniable that it shatters decades of certainty in an instant. But here's the cruelty of it: most people mistake that lightning for the whole storm. They call this flash awakening when it's only the briefest brush with it, like a dream you try to hold on to, but it slips through your fingers before you can even name it. You smell the scent of liberation on the wind, and then it's gone, leaving you restless, reaching certain you've glimpsed something real, but unable to make it stay. The trap is thinking the door opening is the same as walking through it. That first glimpse feels like truth because for the first time you see how much of your life has been built on illusions. But the moment you see through the facade, terror creeps in, not the terror of waking, but of what follows when you can't go back. Because true awakening is not stepping into bliss, it is stepping into fire. The heat comes not from the world outside you, but from the things you've buried. So deep, you've forgotten they exist. Memories, wounds, truths you swore you'd never face. The shadow you've denied all your life begins to stir, and it is not polite in its arrival. It claws at the edges of your identity, demands space, demands to be seen. And for most people, that is unbearable. So they retreat. They run back to the old comforts, repaint the walls of their prison, and call it healing. They tell themselves they've changed, but all they've done is rearrange the furniture in the same cell. The light was welcome, but the heat was too much. Awareness without responsibility. Insight without transformation. And this is the wound of the modern soul. Carl Jung warned that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And you begin to see why, because awakening isn't the end of suffering. It's the beginning of a more honest kind. The kind that burns away the masks and the roles you've worn for safety, the kind that strips you until there's nothing left to hide behind. This is where most people turn back at the edge of the fire. They feel the burn and retreat, terrified of the unraveling. They fear losing control, not realizing that the very unraveling they resist is what will set them free. Because real awakening isn't a single event, it's a slow, painful disintegration of everything false you've built around your inner emptiness. You imagine enlightenment as light descending from above, but more often it is a descent into the underworld of your own psyche. You meet the shadow there, the parts of you you swore you'd never become, the urges you've denied, the pain that has woven itself so deeply into your personality. You no longer know where it ends, and you begin. And here lies the paradox Jung understood so deeply. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your doorway. But to walk through it, you must first be devoured. You must become what you fear before you can transcend it. Most people see their shadow and run. They rationalize it away, decorate it with spiritual language, light candles and chant affirmations, anything to avoid the descent. Because surrender is death, the death of the known, the death of the mask, the death of the ego's illusions. They want rebirth without burial, transformation without sacrifice. But no resurrection is possible without crucifixion. And so they build a new prison, prettier than the last, decorated with the right words, the right symbols, the right image of being awakened. But it's still a cage, because deep down, they haven't met the darkness in themselves. They are still performing for love, still hiding for acceptance, still outsourcing their truth to external authority. The soul sees through this and waits patiently, painfully for the day you'll be brave enough to go deeper. Because the unconscious doesn't rest. What you avoid doesn't vanish. It waits. It waits in silence until the moment it erupts, tearing through the structures you've built on false foundations. This is why so many who taste awakening soon find their lives collapsing emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Not because they failed, but because the soul refuses to let you build your future on the scaffolding of lies. It will strip you of everything you've used to numb yourself. Relationships that drain you. Ambitions that hollow you out. The endless need for validation, the comfort of constant distraction. And that stripping feels like death because it is. But it is also the only way to be reborn. The problem is when the collapse comes, most interpret it as failure. They scramble to fix it, to patch the cracks, to rebuild the old structure rather than let it fall. Anything to avoid the silence that follows. But that silence is the point. Because awakening isn't about gathering more knowledge or achieving more. It's about becoming empty enough that something true can finally take root. It's about presence. It's about wholeness. And that can't be given to you, it must be lived, suffered and earned. This is the dark night of the soul, when no one is watching and no one can save you. Only those who walk through this fire and keep walking come to understand what it really means to awaken. Not as a performance, not as an identity, but as a dismantling, a return, a reckoning. It demands everything from you, especially the parts you cling to most tightly. It asks for your illusions, your pride, your carefully crafted performance. It demands that you stand face to face with the archetypes you've banished from your self-image, the wounded child, the tyrant, the addict, the manipulator. Not to shame them, but to integrate them. Because Jung taught that becoming whole, the process he called individuation, requires the integration of opposites. Not eradicating your darkness, but uniting it with your light. This is the sacred union. And it is brutal, raw, and holy because it forces you to be real. And this realness is the beginning of freedom. Not the kind that comes from changing your outer circumstances, but the kind that comes when you stop betraying yourself just to be loved. When you no longer shrink to fit in. When you stop asking permission to exist. You begin to live as soul, not as role. You speak from the silence within, and everything false begins to fall away. Yes, people will leave. Yes, dreams will die. Yes, old versions of you will beg to be resurrected. But if you remain faithful to the fire, to that inner knowing that refuses to be silenced, you will not just awaken, you will transform. You stand at the edge of a threshold you didn't know existed until the ground beneath your old life gave way. It isn't a doorway anyone else can see, yet you feel it as tangibly as the air in your lungs. Behind you, the path is already ash, not because it was meaningless, but because it served its purpose. It brought you here. But here is where most people hesitate. They've glimpsed the cost. They know the truth isn't won with pretty intentions or poetic insights. It asks for blood. It asks for humility. It asks for the dismantling of everything that once made them feel safe, important, or certain. Jung was clear: awakening is not about becoming something new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you what to be. But that remembering is not gentle. It's not an addition. It's a subtraction. Layer after layer of persona, the face you show to be accepted. The story you've rehearsed to be understood falls away until all that's left is silence. And here's the irony. Most people panic when they arrive at that silence. They think something has gone wrong because the world has conditioned them to believe that meaning is noise, that worth is measured in productivity, that stillness is failure. But this silence is not emptiness. It is presence. It is the sound of your soul finally breathing after years of suffocation beneath the machinery of performance. Still, the silence will strip you bare. It will make you feel lost, disoriented, even forsaken. The mind will call you back to the known, the rules, the structures, the identity you built for survival. But that self cannot walk this path. That self was never truly you. It was an adaptation, a defense, a mask. If you put it back on, your soul will go quiet again, not from anger, but from respect. Because the soul knows when you are not ready. It waits for courage, not comfort. Not confidence, but the raw, trembling willingness to lose everything that isn't real. This is why most people stay trapped. They want transformation to feel like growth, but true growth often feels like devastation. It feels like the dismantling of certainty, the crumbling of belief, the loneliness of becoming. And yes, it is lonely, because awakening is a path of shedding, not adding. You shed identities. You shed relationships. You shed dreams that belong to a version of you built on survival rather than truth. And in that shedding you feel naked, unseen, misunderstood. But this nakedness is the womb of rebirth, the place where all that is unnecessary dies so that something authentic can be born. Jung called this process individuation, the becoming whole through integration of the fragmented self. That means reclaiming the parts you've disowned, the ugly, selfish, jealous, bitter, needy, ashamed parts. It means seeing how they've shaped your choices, how they've hidden behind your morality, how they've whispered in your ear while you pretended you couldn't hear them. This work isn't done in temples, it's done in the mess of living. In your arguments, in your envy, in the way you shut down when love gets too close, in the way you react when someone mirrors back the thing you most despise in yourself. It's done in solitude when no one is watching and no one is applauding. Most people avoid it because it brings confrontation, not comfort. Stillness, not distraction. Mirrors, not praise. But if you can stand before that mirror trembling, yet unflinching, you'll begin to see the contours of your own soul. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The shadow that once terrified you now becomes your teacher. The pain that once broke you now becomes your portal. The emptiness that once haunted you now becomes sacred space. Because you no longer fear the dark, you've walked through it. You've sat with it. You've listened to its secrets, and in return, it has told you the truth. You are not broken. You are buried. Buried beneath roles, conditioning, and the desperate need to be liked. And now that you've stopped running, the soul can rise not as something new, but as something ancient, eternal, unshakable. This is what it means to awaken, not to escape the world, but to finally meet it with all of you present. No masks, no armor, no apologies. When you live from here, there is no need to prove anything. No need to earn the right to exist. You are not seeking something impressive. You are seeking something true, something that feels like home in your bones, something that whispers yes in the silence, even when you can't explain why. This is the freedom most fear, the freedom that comes when you no longer need permission to exist, when you no longer betray yourself for belonging, when you no longer ask for approval to be what you already are. And so you walk not forward, but inward. Each step takes you deeper into the truths you once avoided. You find the inner child still weeping beneath the rubble of your old life. You find the wounded lover still aching from betrayals never spoken aloud. You find the parts of you labeled too much, too sensitive, too broken, and you see they were never flaws. They were the parts closest to your soul, the ones you abandoned to fit in, the ones you silenced to survive. And awakening now means bringing them home, giving them a voice, letting them shape you instead of shame you. This is the work, and it never ends. Because you are not here to arrive, you are here to evolve again and again. And with every layer you shed, with every truth you claim, with every lie you stop telling yourself, you become more whole, more rooted, more real. You stop looking for someone to save you because you finally remember who you are. Not a victim of circumstance, not a role crafted to win approval, not a project to be fixed, but a soul ancient, infinite, untamed. And that soul has been waiting for this moment since before you could name it. It doesn't want you to wake up halfway. It wants you to awaken completely. And complete awakening is not a single epiphany. It is the slow burning away of every false identity you've worn like a second skin. It is the recognition that you were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be real. But here is where the temptation comes. You've endured the collapse, the fire, the silence. You've glimpsed the rawness of being unmasked. And just as the path begins to deepen, you hear the whisper, "This is enough." That whisper doesn't come from the soul, it comes from the part of you that fears there's more to lose. Because the soul is not satisfied with halfway returns. It will keep calling, not with loud demands, but with that quiet ache that will not leave you alone. It calls you into deeper forests, into darker waters, into the places within you that still hold fragments of your power hostage. You didn't come here to be accepted. You didn't come here to be good. You came here to remember. And remembering requires walking into the wild places of your own unconscious to reclaim what you left behind, your voice, your power, your fire. It requires holding the contradictions you've been taught to split apart. Love and rage, peace and chaos, divinity and shadow, and calling them wholeness. Because wholeness doesn't mean purity. It means nothing in you is exiled. This is the work of the awakened, not to escape the world, but to root so deeply in soul that the world cannot shake you. Not to end suffering, but to find meaning within it. Not to chase light, but to carry it even when the night is long. And when the old self returns to tempt you, offering the comfort of numbness, the safety of pretense, you will not hate it. You will not try to destroy it. You will thank it, because without it you would never have been driven to this edge. Then you will choose differently, not perfectly, but truthfully. And that is all awakening has ever asked of you, radical honesty. The kind of honesty that has nothing to do with appearances. The kind that stands naked in the mirror of the soul and says, I remember. You remember what it means to be alive. To feel everything, not just the joy but the grief, the fear, the longing. To carry both pain and beauty in the same breath and still rise. And when you live from that remembering, life changes in ways no one else can measure. You begin to notice the sacred in the smallest things, the way grief softens you, the way silence speaks louder than noise, the way wounds become bridges to other hearts. You stop rushing. You stop proving. You stop trying to fix what was never broken. You meet life as it is, not as you were taught it should be. And from that meeting, love is born. Not the fragile love that craves validation, but the fierce love that holds space for every part of you, especially the ones you thought disqualified you from being worthy. Because now you know the shadow was never your enemy. It was your invitation. And by accepting it, you haven't become darker, you've become whole. The next time the silence surrounds you, the next time the darkness folds in, you won't see it as an intruder. You'll sit with it. You'll let it speak. You'll let it show you the places you still cling, the wounds you still haven't forgiven. And when it's time, you'll release, not with force, not with desperation, but with trust. Because what is meant to fall away will fall, and what is meant to remain will stand without effort. You are not here to live someone else's version of awakening. You are not here to walk another's path. You are here to become your own compass, to navigate by the quiet voice within, even when the world roars for your attention. And yes, that might mean walking alone for a time, walking with tears, with doubt, with shaking hands, but still walking. Because stillness born of fear is not safety, it is stagnation. And movement born of truth, even one trembling step, will open doors no map could ever show you. You are not trapped by your past, not by your fear, not by your wounds. You are only ever trapped by your refusal to listen to the voice that has been calling you home all along. That voice does not shout. It does not bargain. It simply waits, whispering, come home to the fire, come home to the silence, come home to the pain, the power, the wildness, the wisdom. Come home to the you that does not need to be fixed, only remembered. And when you arrive trembling, raw but alive, you will know the truth most. Never reach, you were never meant to stay asleep. You were born for this. You were born to awaken fully, even if it burns, especially if it burns. The burn is not a punishment. It is the mark of transformation, the alchemy that turns illusion to ash and reveals the gold beneath. The ego feels it as loss, but the soul knows it as liberation. Because every flame that consumes the false makes more space for the real. You begin to see that what is dying was never truly yours. It was borrowed, inherited, constructed in response to a world that told you how to be. The persona that carefully managed mask you wore to earn acceptance begins to fall apart. And it feels disorienting, even dangerous to let it crumble, because it's been your armor for as long as you can remember. But Jung called the persona a necessary fiction. Necessary because without it, you could not have survived the early demands of belonging. Fiction because it was never the full truth of who you are. The work now is not to destroy it in anger, but to let it dissolve naturally so the self, the vast, integrated totality of your being, can step forward. This stepping forward is not a single moment. It's the slow realization that you no longer need to perform to be worthy. It's the refusal to trade authenticity for approval. It's the quiet courage to say no when your old self would have smiled and complied. And here is the paradox: you feared that being real would isolate you, but it becomes the ground on which true connection can grow. Because only when you stop pretending can others truly see you. Only when you stop hiding your shadow can you meet theirs without judgment. The shadow itself begins to change in your perception. What once seemed like a dark enemy now appears as a long-lost companion, misunderstood, rejected, but holding pieces of your vitality. You see how every quality you condemned in yourself was a distorted expression of some deeper truth. How your anger hid your boundaries, how your envy pointed to your unclaimed desires, how your fear was the guardian of what mattered most. Integration is not about making these parts pretty, it's about making them conscious. When the unconscious becomes conscious, it no longer needs to sabotage you from the dark. It can serve you from the light. And yet this integration cannot happen by willpower alone. It happens in moments of deep surrender, when you allow yourself to feel what you've avoided for years, when you stop defending against your own truth, when you stop editing your inner voice to sound acceptable. You notice that the more you surrender, the more dreams come alive at night. Not random images, but messages from the unconscious, symbolic mirrors of the work you're doing in waking life. Jung saw dreams as letters from the self guiding you toward balance, offering images that the rational mind cannot yet understand. Sometimes they bring you face to face with figures who embody your shadow or your opposite. Sometimes they reveal an inner landscape, a house, a forest, an ocean that changes as you change. Paying attention to these dreamscapes, you realize awakening is not just an emotional journey, it's a symbolic one. Your psyche speaks in archetypes: the inner child, the wise elder, the lover, the warrior. And when these figures appear, they are not fantasies, they are aspects of you calling to be integrated. The anima and animus. The inner feminine and masculine energies begin to reveal themselves as well. The anima brings intuition, receptivity, and connection to the unconscious. The animus brings clarity, focus, and assertive will. To reject either is to live half a life. To embrace both is to move toward wholeness. This is why awakening often feels like being torn apart. It's the psyche trying to unite its opposites. And the tension between them can feel unbearable until you see that the tension is not meant to be resolved, but held. Held until the two poles transform into something greater than either alone. You begin to live differently without deciding to. You notice how you no longer rush to fill silence with noise, how you no longer need to win every argument, how you can sit in discomfort without scrambling for escape. This is not passivity, it's presence. And presence is what the soul has been longing for all along. Not the presence that watches life from a safe distance, but the kind that meets it moment by moment with nothing withheld. And when suffering comes, and it still does, you stop asking, "Why me?" You begin to ask, "What is this showing me? What part of me is ready to be seen?" You no longer see suffering as a detour from your path. It becomes part of the path itself. The world around you may not understand. Some will be threatened by your refusal to play the old games. Some will accuse you of changing too much or of not being who you used to be. But you will understand, because the old self was never meant to be permanent. And when you find yourself alone again in the quiet, you won't rush to fill it. You'll sit listening, feeling, breathing. And in that stillness you'll hear it again, that quiet voice, steady and unwavering. This is who you are, and this is enough. You begin to realize that enough was never meant to be a measurement. It's not about worthiness in the eyes of others, not about proving you deserve to exist. Enough is the state you return to when you strip away every demand, every performance, every role you thought you had to play. Enough is your essence, unchanging, untouched by failure or achievement. But to live from that place, you have to let die every false foundation you've built. This is why awakening can feel like a series of funerals. You bury versions of yourself that once kept you safe. You lay to rest dreams that belong to someone you no longer are. You let go of relationships that cannot breathe in the atmosphere of your truth. And yet, with each burial, something ancient in you stirs. Because what is falling away is not your life, it is your camouflage. Beneath it, the self emerges, and the self is not fragile. It does not need the constant scaffolding of validation. It does not shapeshift to avoid disapproval. Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." And you see now why: because the world outside is always asking you to be someone else. But the world inside is asking you to come home. Coming home, though, is not a sentimental return. It is a confrontation. You find the places where you betrayed yourself just to be chosen. You face the memories you've kept locked away because they disrupt the narrative you tell about your life. You meet the archetypes you thought you'd outgrown: the victim, the saboteur, the martyr. And you see how they still influence your choices in ways that are both subtle and profound. It's tempting to think integration means conquering them, but you realize now that conquest is just another form of rejection. Integration is letting them sit at your table, listening to what they've been trying to protect you from, understanding the distorted logic behind their actions, and then reclaiming the energy they've been holding hostage in the dark. In doing this, you start to see the patterns of projection, how the qualities you despise most in others are often the unclaimed parts of yourself. The impatience that enrages you mirrors your own suppressed urgency. The arrogance you criticize hides the confidence you refuse to embody. The coldness you condemn reflects the boundaries you've never allowed yourself to enforce. When you own these qualities, they stop controlling you from the shadows. You stop needing to fight them in others because you've made peace with them in yourself. This is the paradox of shadow work. The more of yourself you embrace, the less the world becomes your enemy. It doesn't mean life stops hurting. It means hurt is no longer an indictment of your worth. Pain becomes information, not a verdict. It becomes a teacher that speaks the language of transformation. And so the chaos that once sent you scrambling for control now becomes a forge. When the fire rises, you don't run, you listen. You ask, what is being burned away? What wants to be born from these ashes? And slowly, the fear of losing what is false becomes smaller than the joy of discovering what is true. But the work never ends, not because you are broken, but because the self is infinite. Every time you think you've reached the center, a deeper layer reveals itself. Every integration births another invitation to go further, to become more whole, to inhabit yourself more fully. This is not exhausting once you stop resisting. It becomes a rhythm, a breathing inhale into awareness, exhale into release. The psyche is not trying to destroy you, it is trying to return you to yourself. And as you live this way, your relationship to the world changes. You no longer seek to control it in order to feel safe. You no longer cling to certainty as proof that you're on the right path. You live by something quieter, more fluid, the subtle alignment between your inner truth and your outer life. People may still misunderstand you. They may say you've changed, and they're right, you have, but not in the way they think. You haven't become someone else. You've stopped pretending to be someone you never were. The greatest irony is that what feels like the end of everything is actually the start of living as soul. It's not about transcending humanity, it's about embodying it fully. Light and shadow, wound and wisdom, fear and courage, all held in the same heart without needing to be reconciled into something prettier. And in that wholeness, there is a quiet, unstoppable freedom, the kind that cannot be given to you by another, the kind that cannot be taken away. And now you understand why so few walk this path all the way. Because it demands the one thing the ego resists above all else: surrender. Not the surface kind where you let go of what you didn't care about to begin with, but the soul-deep surrender that strips you of your illusions, your importance, even your identity. You must release not just what you have, but who you think you are. This is not a single dramatic moment, it is 1,000 small deaths. The death of the persona in conversations where you choose honesty over likability. The death of the mask when you admit you don't know and stop pretending to have the answers. The death of the role when you stop contorting yourself to fit someone else's story. And each time you let a part of the false self fall, the silence inside you grows deeper. At first it feels like emptiness, like you've lost too much to ever feel whole again. But slowly you begin to hear something within that emptiness, a soundless pulse, steady, patient. It is the self waiting for you to inhabit it fully. Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is not a straight ascent toward light. It is a spiral drawing you back through the places you thought you'd left behind, each time seeing them more clearly, each time reclaiming what you once rejected. You meet the same patterns again, but this time you respond from the self, not the persona. And this changes everything. Even your suffering changes texture. It is no longer the chaos of unconscious wounds repeating themselves, it becomes a conscious initiation. You see how each challenge is shaping you, not breaking you. You stop asking life to be easier and start asking to be more present for it, even when it hurts. There is a power in this kind of presence. The storms of life still come, but they no longer carry you away. You feel the waves crash against you, and you remain rooted in something deeper than thought, deeper than emotion. This is not numbness. This is the stillness of knowing you are not the storm. And yet you do not separate yourself from the world. You see yourself reflected in it, your light in moments of beauty, your shadow in its cruelty and injustice. You understand projection now not as a flaw, but as a compass pointing you toward what in yourself still longs to be integrated. What you condemn out there is often the same force you have not yet made peace with in here. Instead of trying to fix the world so you can feel safe, you bring your work inward. You face the parts of you that mirror the very things you despise. This is not self-blame, it is self-responsibility, because you see that the only true power you have is the transformation of your own being. And as you transform, your way of moving through the world shifts. Your relationships are no longer transactions for validation. They are meeting places of soul. Your work is no longer a stage for proving your worth. It is an expression of what is real within you. Your choices are no longer about survival. They are about alignment. It is here that the anima and animus find harmony within you, the inner feminine and masculine, no longer in conflict, but working together. Your intuition flows into action. Your will is guided by depth, not impulse. You no longer swing between extremes because you have found the middle ground that is not compromise, but integration. And yet this balance is not static. Life will tilt it, unsettle it, test it. But now you meet those tests with curiosity instead of panic. You see them as the psyche's way of keeping you awake, reminding you that wholeness is not a fixed state, it is a living process. So when the darkness returns, and it will, you no longer see it as a failure of your awakening. You recognize it as another descent, another chance to gather what you left behind. You enter it willingly, carrying the light you have cultivated, knowing that this time you are not going there to be destroyed. You are going there to bring yourself home. And when you emerge, because you will be a little less bound by the old fears, a little more rooted in your own truth. This is how awakening unfolds, not in a single explosion of clarity, but in a lifetime of descents and returns, each one leaving you more whole than before. By now you know the path is not linear. You know you will face temptations to turn back, to numb out, to settle for half-truths. But you also know that the voice of the self will not be silenced for long. It will keep calling not to some grand destiny outside you, but to the depth within you that is your true home. And when you answer that call not just once, but again and again, you live differently. Not to impress, not to win, not to be seen, but to be true.
There is a hidden hunger in those who harm, and it seeks the purest light to devour. Not because it hates the light, but because it cannot create it on its own. And so it takes. It consumes. It finds the softest soul in the room, the one with the open heart and the unguarded hands, and it begins its work. If you are an empath, someone who feels too much, loves too much, gives too much, you have likely met them, not once, not twice, but in patterns, cycles, waves of connection so intense it feels like fate followed by confusion, so sharp it feels like betrayal. You've wondered why it keeps happening, why you attract the wounded, why you fall for the charming ones who soon become cruel, why you see red flags and still walk forward. And the answer isn't that something is wrong with you. It's that something deep within you has been trained since childhood to believe that love is earned through pain. That connection must come with cost, that being needed is safer than being known. Carl Jung warned us the things we cannot see in ourselves are the things that rule our lives. He called it the shadow. Not the evil, not the monster, but the parts of us we've disowned, the forgotten parts, the silenced parts, the truth that we've swallowed so completely we no longer taste it. And for the empath, the shadow is not about rage or selfishness alone. It's about boundaries, it's about the need for reciprocity, It's about the hidden longing to finally be seen, not for how much you give, but for who you are when you give nothing at all. That part of you, the self that's never been safe to emerge, draws in others who reflect its absence. Because we don't attract what we want. We attract what we are willing to tolerate. And what we tolerate becomes the curriculum of our soul. So what happens when a child grows up in an environment where emotional volatility is normal, when the caregivers love inconsistently or withdraw love when the child needs it most? That child learns to feel everything, every glance, every pause, every silence. The empath isn't born in light. They are shaped in emotional survival. They become radar systems, detecting emotional shifts, adjusting behavior, performing safety in the name of love. And they get good at it. So good, in fact, that they lose the ability to ask, "But what do I feel?" The identity becomes welded to usefulness. If I'm helpful, I'll be kept. If I'm kind, I'll be safe. If I love them enough, they won't leave. And so begins the unconscious contract: I will carry your pain if it means I won't be abandoned. But pain attracts pain. Not in a spiritual punishment sense, but in a neurobiological one. If chaos is your normal, stability feels boring. If inconsistency is your childhood, intensity feels like home. You meet someone who is emotionally unavailable, unpredictable, moody, and instead of running something in your bones, says, "This feels familiar." You mistake familiarity for love. But love without safety is not love, it's reenactment. The most dangerous people empaths attract are not dangerous because they wear masks. They're dangerous because they know how to reflect what you most want to see. They read you like a blueprint. They find your softness, your openness, your willingness to understand instead of judge, and they mirror it. For a while. Long enough to win your trust, long enough for you to bond, long enough for your nervous system to settle into their presence, and once they know you're attached, the game changes. Suddenly, the warmth is gone, the affection disappears, and in its place comes confusion, gaslighting, passive aggression, emotional withdrawal. And yet you stay, because by then you've made it mean something about you. If they pull away, it must be your fault. If they're cruel, maybe you said something wrong. If they lie, maybe you misunderstood. And this is how the dangerous ones survive, by keeping empaths in a loop of self-doubt. But this isn't weakness. This is trauma bonding, and it runs deeper than logic. It runs into the unconscious places Jung studied so closely. The psyche doesn't seek happiness, it seeks familiarity. The nervous system doesn't crave peace, it craves what it knows. And until you make what you know conscious, you will call it destiny. This is the dark mirror of the empath's light, the unhealed need to be needed. The inability to watch others suffer without stepping in. The guilt that arises when you consider walking away. The terror that silence might mean abandonment. These are not moral flaws. They are psychological scars. They are the residue of a life spent managing other people's emotions before you were ever given permission to understand your own. And this is why the most dangerous people are drawn to you, because you do the emotional labor, because you explain away their behavior, because you offer compassion when they offer cruelty, because you accept crumbs and call it connection, and in doing so you reinforce their sickness and your own abandonment. Jung taught that healing comes from bringing the unconscious into the light. So ask yourself, when was the last time you questioned your reflex to rescue? When was the last time you asked yourself why you stayed in a situation where you felt unseen? When was the last time you sat in silence long enough to hear the parts of you that are tired of being so understanding? The shadow doesn't destroy you, denying it does. And the part of you that longs to be loved without performance. That is your golden wound. That is your soul trying to come home. Not through another person. Not through someone broken who needs fixing. But through the moment you finally say, "I will not be a sanctuary for chaos anymore." You don't need to become harder. You need to become clearer. You don't need to feel less. You need to feel you. You don't need to stop being an empath. You need to stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. Because real love, true, deep, nourishing love doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't feed off your exhaustion. It doesn't confuse intensity with intimacy. It doesn't make you prove your worth by how much you can tolerate. It meets you, in your fullness, in your boundaries, in your presence. And until you meet yourself there, you will keep opening your arms to those who only know how to take. So pause. Breathe. Return to your body. Feel the ache in your chest. That's not weakness. That's your truth knocking. That's your forgotten self begging to be remembered. And maybe, just maybe, that's where your healing begins. The greatest illusion an empath clings to is that their love has the power to heal what refuses to be touched. It's a beautiful story, noble even. But it's a story written in the ink of survival, not truth. Because when your nervous system has been wired through pain, your capacity for endurance becomes mistaken for strength. And that's the first thread the most dangerous people will pull. They don't seek the loud, the guarded, the boundary setters. They seek the tender, the over-explainers, the ones who confuse understanding with connection. They look for the ones who will give them the benefit of the doubt long after doubt should have become distance. And you, as the empath, carry the perfect wound. You're open, but you're afraid. You're soft, but you're starving. You're present, but you've never really been received. So when they arrive, wrapped in charisma, cloaked in charm, you mistake the intensity of their attention for the depth of their heart. And you ignore the tightening in your stomach, the way their eyes linger too long, the speed at which they pull you close, because a part of you, hidden beneath layers of people-pleasing and spiritualized compassion, still believes that to be chosen quickly means to be loved deeply. But speed is not intimacy, and flattery is not safety, and the ones who move fastest often do so because they cannot survive being seen. You are not broken for believing them. You are human. And you've spent a lifetime being told that your value is in your availability, that love is earned through proving, through giving, through staying. And so you stayed, even when the warmth turned cold, even when the tone shifted from affectionate to biting, even when the attention turned into control, into withdrawal, into blame. You stayed because the story inside you said, if I leave, I'm cruel. If I stay, I'm good. But where did you learn that love and goodness are tied to your capacity to suffer? Look back. Look honestly. Not to blame, but to understand. Did you learn love through consistency or through tension? Did you learn to trust your emotions or to manage someone else's? Did you feel safe expressing anger, or were you punished for it? Were you allowed to rest, or were you rewarded for giving, and giving more? The empath who has never faced these questions becomes a blueprint for emotional predators. Not because they are weak, but because they are wide open in all the places they've never defended. And Jung understood this deeply. The shadow isn't just about darkness, it's about vulnerability. Unconscious vulnerability. The parts of ourselves we've never owned become invitations for distortion. When you don't know where your boundaries are, others will define them for you. When you don't believe your anger is valid, others will feed on your silence. When you see yourself as a healer, you will ignore the places where you are bleeding out. Empaths don't just attract dangerous people, they stay with them. And that's the deeper wound. Anyone can be deceived once, but to remain in a relationship where your soul is shrinking is not deception, it's a pattern. And patterns come from pain that has not been named. The empath says, but I see the good in them. But what they often mean is I see the parts of them that reflect my unhealed hope. The idea that if I can just love enough, they'll become who I need. The belief that I can rescue them from themselves, and in doing so, prove that I am worthy of the love I was never given. But you are not responsible for who someone becomes after they hurt you. You are not responsible for fixing someone who doesn't even admit they're broken. You are not responsible for making up the difference between who someone is and who you imagine they could be. That's not empathy. That's illusion. And that illusion has a cost. The cost is your vitality, your clarity, your joy, your sense of self. Slowly over time, you start to doubt your own perception. You find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do. You begin to explain your tone, your words, your needs, until one day you forget what they even were. You become a mirror for someone else's projections, a container for someone else's unresolved rage. You become a therapist in a relationship where you needed a partner. You become the safe space for someone who only creates chaos. And the worst part, you call it love. You wear your exhaustion like a badge of honor. You tell yourself that loyalty means staying even when everything in your body is begging to go. You read more spiritual books. You take more deep breaths. You justify. You meditate. You pray. And underneath it all, you're still hoping they'll change. That if you just do one more thing right, they'll finally see you. But if they didn't see you when you were whole, they won't see you when you're falling apart. Jung said that people don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that includes your darkness, the part of you that is angry, the part that regrets staying so long, the part that feels ashamed for allowing someone to treat you that way, the part that feels complicit. These parts aren't your enemy. They are your call to freedom. Because once you admit the truth, not just about them, but about you begin to unravel the pattern. You begin to see that the most dangerous person you've allowed into your life isn't them. It's the internal voice that told you this is the best you'll get. The voice that whispered, if you leave, you'll be alone forever. The voice that said, it's not abuse, it's just passion. That voice is the echo of your shadow. And now you're strong enough to face it. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to kill it. You just need to turn toward it and say, I see you. But I don't belong to you anymore. And from that moment forward, you begin to belong to yourself. You stop explaining your value. You stop trying to be enough for someone who is committed to emptiness. You stop negotiating your needs to protect their ego. You stop asking for crumbs and calling it connection. And as you reclaim your wholeness, something incredible happens. Your energy changes. You stop being a magnet for pain. You stop drawing in the ones who want to take. You begin to radiate a different frequency, one that says, I will not be the mirror anymore. I will be the flame. And only those who carry fire within themselves will dare to come close. The moment you stop being a mirror for the broken is the moment your entire world begins to shift. At first, it feels like emptiness, like silence after a long dysfunctional song. There's no one to rescue, no one to prove yourself to, no one to anchor your worth to. You may even feel lost because when your identity has been sculpted around service and self-abandonment, stillness feels like failure. But don't confuse quiet with absence. That stillness, that void, it is not empty. It is sacred space. It is the soil where the self begins to grow, where your truth, no longer filtered through someone else's lens, begins to find its voice again. For the empath, the true challenge isn't just walking away from the dangerous person. It's walking away from the dangerous belief that you were ever unworthy of peace, that you ever had to earn love with your suffering, that loyalty meant tolerating disrespect, that being kind meant staying silent. You were trained to believe that your highest virtue was your capacity to endure. But Jung would tell you there is no individuation without rebellion. You cannot become yourself by maintaining the system that erased you. So now the fire comes, not to burn you but to cleanse. It arrives in moments of righteous anger when you finally admit how long you silenced yourself. When you stop justifying, stop making excuses, stop telling stories that protect those who harmed you. The fire comes to melt the persona, the false self built from trauma and adaptation. And it hurts. Because in letting go of who you were, you lose more than the relationship, you lose the role. The rescuer, the peacemaker, the selfless one. But you must ask yourself, were these roles ever chosen? Or were they inherited? That's the question that burns through the illusion, and it leaves you raw, vulnerable, human, but also free. Because now you have nothing left to defend. And into that rawness, something new begins to emerge. Not strength as you once defined it, being able to carry everyone else, but sovereignty, presence, rootedness, the kind of strength that says, I do not need to be needed to be real. This is where the deeper healing begins. Not the kind that happens in therapy alone, not the kind you can journal your way through, but the kind that unfolds slowly, mysteriously in the body, in the breath, in the decision to not explain yourself anymore, in the quiet courage to disappoint someone and still sleep peacefully, in the holy act of saying no and not feeling the need to apologize afterward. You begin to reclaim your boundaries not as walls, but as invitations. Not to keep love out, but to protect what is sacred. You start to notice the ways you once over-explained, overcompensated. And instead of judging yourself, you thank those old behaviors. They kept you safe, but now you're not surviving. You're awakening. And awakening demands a new contract with yourself. No more dimming to be accepted. No more softening truth to avoid discomfort. No more shrinking to keep the peace. You don't owe the world a version of you that makes others comfortable. You owe yourself truth, wholeness, integrity. And in that truth, you begin to understand what real empathy is. It's not taking on someone else's pain until you forget your own. It's not losing yourself in someone else's chaos and calling it compassion. It's presence with yourself first. It's choosing to feel what's real instead of numbing with service. It's saying, I love deeply, and I love myself too much to betray my soul for you. This is the turning point Jung pointed toward when the self begins to take the driver's seat, and the shadow is no longer repressed but recognized. You no longer fear your anger. You honor it. You no longer avoid your sadness. You sit with it. You don't bypass discomfort with spiritual cliches. You feel every layer, because every feeling is a map back to your truth. And as you integrate these parts, your voice, your no, your rage, your desire, you become whole. And in that wholeness, the dangerous people begin to vanish. Not because the world changes, but because your energy does. You no longer carry the frequency of the wounded healer, the open door, the easy target. You carry the energy of someone who sees clearly, who has walked through the fire and returned with sight. And predators do not approach those who see them. You walk into rooms differently now. You don't scan for who needs you. You scan for who sees you. You speak without filtering. You love without rescuing. You give without bleeding. You begin to attract people who are not broken, but becoming. People who are not looking to be saved, but to grow with you. People who are drawn to your wholeness, not dependent on your sacrifice. And even when you are alone, you no longer feel lonely. Because for the first time, you're with yourself. Fully, fiercely, tenderly. And that inner relationship between you and the self, that is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. It is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is not about rising above pain. It is about becoming so intimate with it that it no longer defines you. You become the container, not the content. You become the one who holds, not the one who's held hostage by your wounds. So, no, you are not here to absorb everyone's pain. You are here to transform, to alchemize your story into strength, to turn your empathy into discernment, to turn your sensitivity into intuition, to turn your suffering into sovereignty. And you can still love. You can still care. You can still feel. But now you do it from a place of choice, not compulsion. From freedom, not fear. From clarity, not codependency. And that is what makes you powerful, not your pain, but your presence. You are not fragile. You are not naive. You are not a sponge for someone else's darkness. You are the light that sees through it. And when you truly see, you will never again mistake chaos for love. You will never again bow to the illusion that you are only lovable when you're bleeding. You will never again shrink into a silence that keeps someone else comfortable while you disappear. Because now you know who you are. And who you are does not need to be saved. There is a silence that comes after the storm. Not the silence of emptiness, but of understanding. And in that silence you begin to see what you could not before. You see the threads, the patterns, the unconscious loyalty to suffering that once disguised itself as love. You see how you wore compassion like a shield. How you softened yourself until nothing was left but fragments of identity that pleased others but betrayed your soul. You see finally that it was never about them, it was about the part of you that believed you didn't matter unless someone needed you, and that belief was never yours to begin with. It was inherited, imprinted, passed down through childhood dynamics, ancestral wounds, unspoken contracts that told you you exist to ease the pain of others. Your feelings are dangerous, your boundaries are selfish, your anger is destructive, and you believed them because survival demanded it, because belonging required it. But now you are awake, not just intellectually, not just spiritually, existentially, somatically. You've felt it in your bones, the cost of betraying your essence. And you've decided that you'd rather be alone in truth than connected in distortion. That's not bitterness, that's evolution. The old self would have called this selfish. The new self calls it sacred. Because when you stop carrying the weight of everyone else's healing, you begin to lift your own soul out of exile. You begin to remember that you were not born to be a sponge for suffering. You were born to be a sovereign witness to life itself, whole, radiant, unapologetically aware. And in this new awareness, something shifts. You stop looking for validation in the eyes of the emotionally unavailable. You stop trying to convince the cold-hearted to warm up. You stop chasing after those who only mirror back your abandonment. Because now you've chosen presence over performance, reality over fantasy, the self over the role. But it's not always clean. Healing rarely is. There are days you'll miss them, the ones who drained you, not because they were good for you, but because they were familiar, and familiarity is seductive. There are moments you'll long for the old identity, the caregiver, the fixer, the one who always knew what others needed before they asked. That role was comforting. It gave you direction. But now direction comes from within. Now you ask yourself, what do I want? What do I feel? What do I need? And at first those questions echo in empty space because you're not used to being the center of your own life. But don't mistake that echo for absence. It's the sound of your real self waking up. And when it does, you realize how much of your empathy was actually abandonment. How often you crossed your own lines just to keep the peace. How many times you said yes when your body screamed no. How long you stayed silent so someone else wouldn't feel discomfort. But your silence was never peace, it was paralysis. And now your nervous system is learning that safety is not found in suppression. It is found in expression, in being fully seen, fully known, fully heard. So you speak, not loudly but clearly. You name the pain, you reclaim your story. You stop gaslighting yourself for the sake of harmony. You let the discomfort come, and you don't shrink. And in that discomfort, you find something you never expected. Your dignity. Not the kind that's given by others, but the kind that rises when you finally belong to yourself. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. Not becoming what others need, but what you are. And what you are is not a vessel for someone else's rage. You are not here to be consumed by those who refuse to do their own work. You are not a therapist for the emotionally immature. You are not a landing pad for the wounded who confuse your kindness with an invitation to control. You are the fire and the earth, the mirror and the mountain. You are the witness, the wound and the healer. You are not just light. You are the sacred union of shadow and soul. And in that union, you no longer tolerate what doesn't resonate with your truth. That means you let go of the people who only call when they need something, of the roles that make you small, of the masks that protected you in childhood but limit you in adulthood. You release them not with hate but with reverence, because they taught you who you are not. And sometimes that is the greatest lesson of all. And as you release, the fear begins to dissolve. The fear that you'll be alone forever. The fear that you're too much or not enough. The fear that you'll never be loved without performing. Those fears melt in the presence of your truth, because you now understand it was never about being lovable. You always were. You just didn't believe it, and that disbelief was the doorway that danger entered through. But now that door is closed, not locked, not armored, just closed, because your home, your body, your mind, your heart is no longer an open field for the lost to wander through. It is a temple, and only those who come with reverence may enter. And yes, this new way of living can feel lonely, but it is the kind of loneliness that births clarity. The kind of silence that gives rise to truth. The kind of solitude that restores you to your essence. And in that restoration, you remember, you are not here to save anyone. You are here to embody the love that you once begged for. You are here to radiate, not to rescue. To stand, not to sacrifice. To love, but never at the expense of your wholeness again. And this time, when someone approaches you with charm wrapped in urgency, you don't fall for it. You feel the pressure in your gut. You trust the intuition you once silenced. You listen not to their words, but to your body's response. You slow down. You say no. You walk away. And it doesn't feel like rejection anymore. It feels like liberation. Because now you know the difference between love and manipulation, between empathy and entanglement, between connection and control. And that knowing, it's not just wisdom, it's your power. You don't just wake up one day and become unshakable. You become unshakable the moment you've been shaken so many times, so violently, that something inside you refuses to bend again. You become unshakable not because you are numb, but because you've allowed yourself to feel everything. And you survived. And more than that, you remembered who you were before the world taught you to forget. You don't become whole by avoiding darkness. You become whole by walking straight into it, eyes open, heart trembling, soul on fire. You become whole by saying, I refuse to disappear just to make you comfortable. I will not shrink for love. I will not bleed for approval. I will not trade my truth for peace. And when you say that not to the world, but to yourself, you cross a threshold. You enter a new landscape, one where your empathy is no longer currency for attention, one where your sensitivity is no longer bait for predators, one where your love is no longer a leash. This is what power really feels like. Not domination, not arrogance, not performance, but sovereignty, stillness, clarity. It's the quiet knowing that you don't need to prove your worth to anyone. It's the freedom that arises when you stop chasing closure and start giving yourself peace. It's the radiance that emanates from within when you realize, I don't need to be chosen to be whole. I choose me. And in that choice, everything changes. Because when you stop betraying yourself, the world has no choice but to meet you differently. Some will fall away, those who fed on your guilt, your compliance, your endless forgiveness. Let them fall. Some will attack you, those who cannot control you anymore. Let them reveal themselves. Some will try to return those who miss the version of you that made their life easier. Let them miss you. Because you are no longer here to be convenient. You are here to be real. And realness has a cost. It means walking away from people you love if loving them means losing yourself. It means saying no when your nervous system begs you to say yes, just to avoid conflict. It means facing the grief of who you could have been if you weren't so busy surviving. But with that cost comes liberation, because what you gain is priceless. A relationship with yourself, a deep, unshakable trust in your own inner knowing, a nervous system that no longer confuses chaos with chemistry, a heart that doesn't open out of obligation but out of discernment, and a body that finally feels like home. This is the gift of individuation. It's not glamorous. It's not viral. It's not something you can show off. But it is everything. Because when you are no longer willing to abandon yourself, life begins to mirror back your wholeness. You attract people who respect your no as much as your yes. You find relationships built on reciprocity, not rescue. You create boundaries not out of fear, but out of reverence. And perhaps most importantly, you stop needing to be understood to feel valid. Because now your validation is internal. Your compass is internal. Your devotion is internal. And that's where the real transformation happens. Not when you stop feeling deeply, but when you stop apologizing for it. Not when you stop caring, but when you stop overfunctioning. Not when you stop loving, but when you love without self-erasure. You realize the most dangerous thing you ever did was put your healing in the hands of those who are still harming you. You realize the most radical act of self-love is not a bubble bath or a mantra. It's removing yourself from the places that require your silence to stay. It's saying, I am not your solution. I am not your scapegoat. I am not your savior. I am mine. And yes, it's hard. Yes, you'll grieve. Yes, you'll have nights where you question everything. But each time you return to your center, each time you sit with your truth, each time you choose alignment over approval, you get stronger, not harder, not colder, stronger. And your strength won't look like what they told you it should. It won't be loud. It won't be flashy. It will be rooted. It will be gentle. It will be steady. It will say, I don't chase. I don't beg. I don't prove. I don't perform. I exist in my truth. And that is enough. And the people who are meant for you, those who see your light without trying to steal it, who honor your depth without drowning in it, they will find you. And not because you reached out in desperation, but because you became a lighthouse, a steady presence in a chaotic world. Not saving others, not fixing others, just standing in your light, just being whole, just being you. So if you've ever asked, why do I attract the most dangerous people? Maybe it's because your light was so bright, it drew the broken. Maybe it's because your empathy was so vast, it felt safe to the unsafe. Maybe it's because your heart was so open, even the closed wanted a piece of it. But you are not here to be devoured. You are not here to bleed endlessly for those who won't heal. You are here to love with discernment, to feel with strength, to walk with wisdom, and to know the most powerful empaths are not the ones who sacrifice themselves. They're the ones who rise. So rise. Rise in your truth. Rise in your wholeness. Rise in your sovereignty. And let the world meet the version of you that no longer fits into their boxes. Let them see the empath who is no longer available for manipulation. Let them feel the boundary of your healed nervous system. Let them witness the power of a heart that no longer bends to survive, but beats freely to live. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are the one they hoped would never remember. And now that you have remembered, there's no going back, because the self has awakened. And once you touch that truth, nothing else feels like home. But maybe the most sacred truth is this. You were never meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to be understood by yourself. Because some souls are not here to fit in. They are here to remember. They are here to carry codes of healing, not just for others, but for their own lineage, their own inner child, their own forgotten dreams. You didn't come to this life to be a balm for the broken and nothing more. You came to awaken, to break the chain, to look darkness in the eye and say, I see you. I've been you, and I choose something else now. This is why your path has never made sense to others. Because it was never supposed to. Empaths are the bridge between suffering and meaning. But even bridges must be walked on with care. When you let others trample you in the name of love, you desecrate your gift. And your gift is too sacred to keep giving it to those who have no intention of honoring it. The world doesn't need another broken healer. It needs whole ones, anchored ones. Healers who are no longer leaking their energy in relationships that feel like reliving old wounds. Healers who do not confuse guilt with love. Healers who choose rest over rescuing. Because the world is drowning in false light smiles that hide suppression, kindness that masks fear, compassion that's born from codependency. But you are here to offer something real. A presence that does not need to fix or impress or disappear. A presence that says, I am enough, just as I am, and I will not abandon myself to be loved. And when you live from that presence, your entire vibration shifts. Your body softens. Your heart opens from a place of sovereignty, not survival. And the dangerous people, they can no longer find you, because they are drawn to wounds, not wholeness. They are drawn to the fractures where they can slip in, not the solidity of someone who has come home to themselves. So let them look. Let them try to trigger you, manipulate you, guilt you. Let them try to resurrect the version of you that would have bowed her head and said, I'm sorry for being too much. She's gone now. And in her place stands someone luminous. Someone who still feels everything but is no longer ruled by it. Someone who still loves deeply but no longer bleeds for it. Someone who still sees the pain in others but doesn't mistake it for their responsibility. This is the final transformation, not into someone harder but into someone truer. The empath, who no longer attracts danger because they are no longer a match for danger. Because danger thrives where boundaries are absent. But you've built yours in fire. In tears, in silence, in nights where you almost gave up. And now you walk like someone who has nothing to prove. Now your light is not a lure, but a shield. Now your softness is not weakness, but wisdom. Because you have remembered this one sacred thing. You were never meant to heal them. You were meant to heal you. And when you do, you become the medicine, not by trying, not by fixing, but simply by being who you were before the world told you not to be. So if you hear these words and something deep inside you trembles, maybe it's your self calling you back. Maybe this is not just a video. Maybe this is your mirror. Maybe this is the moment everything begins to change. You didn't find this by accident. The self is trying to reach you. And now that it has, Don't look away, because your light was never the problem, your forgetting was. And now that you've remembered, you are free, you are home, you are whole, and the dangerous people, they'll never touch you again.